Welcome back. We're in the home stretch now. Here's what we're going to do this afternoon. Start with, we're going to talk about monitoring and measuring behavior. This is something I don't do very often outside of teaching a course, so this is a little bit different for me. So what I want to do is I want to go through a number of ways that it's possible to collect data on kid behavior while you're teaching. So some of them are easier than others to adapt to teaching, but they really are going to be about depending upon who your kids are and what they're doing to make those decisions. So what I will do is go through a whole set of some that are similar. We'll talk about them and then go through a whole nother set that are similar. In each one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have you doing something. So here's what I'd like you to do to get started this afternoon. Find a partner. If there are an odd number of people, it's okay to have one group of 3. And what I'd like you to do is define amongst yourselves a behavior of mine that you're going to monitor while I'm talking. So you could monitor the number of times my hands are in my pockets, or you could number the number of times I say a word or go someplace or do. I want you to get together with your partner and define that behavior. And then I want you to draw a box on your paper, but I don't want you to show this to your neighbor, your partner. You're not going to be comparing notes. You're going to be totally separate, and you're going to be collecting data on this. So for right now, what I'd like you to do is just get together with that partner, define that behavior, and get yourself ready to do your observation. You'll have to be doing your observation while I'm talking. So get together and come up with one. Okay, are you ready? You have a behavior defined and you're ready to observe? Okay, so now, again, just forget about you've been talking with your partner. Just keep that thing in your mind. Don't look at what your partner's doing. Just go on about, but keep your data as you would. So again, you're not looking to see if your partner is collecting when you are, because we want to look afterward to see if you got the same thing. So it would be cheating to be watching each other. You got a little box drawn. We'll run this for 10 minutes. So I'm going to set a little timer on my phone to ring after 10 minutes. At that point, we'll stop. We'll continue on the lecture, and then we'll come back to how did that work for you? And then I've got a different way for you to do it the next time. So I'm starting my timer right now. So you are collecting data as of right now. Here's what we're going to do. I want to start with turning on my remote, and then I'm going to talk about these 6 different ways of recording behaviors. These 6 different ways are all ways that teachers could use to record behavior in a classroom. Some of them only work for very specific types of behaviors. Some work for multiple types of behaviors. We'll talk about each of those. These are all called event-based recording. Event-based recording has one simple definition. You record when behavior happens. What tells you to record? Whatever behavior you wrote down. That's your signal. When that behavior happens, you do something. That's what makes them be called event-based. We're going to talk about 6 of them. In every one, you're just going to watch and record. So the first one is what you're using right now. It's called the tally method. What you do is, when you see it, you make a mark. There it is, I make a mark. There it is, I make a mark. That's all there is to this. So it's the simplest one we've got. The metric means how will we summarize the data. The metric of this is number of times that it occurred. If you knew what time it was when you started and what time it was when you stopped watching, you could convert this into a rate and you could say X times per minute. But that's what you get out of this, is how many times it happened or how many times in a period of time. So the big advantage of using the tally method is it's super easy. You look and you make a mark. What would be hard about doing this in a classroom? I'm trying to teach and do all these things and monitor all of you, and I have to look at this one kid the entire time so I can keep making marks. That's hard to do. While this is the most direct, it is challenging to use this in a classroom with 30 kids when you're watching one kid, because it requires you to watch that kid the entire time. Here's the other issue. If the behaviors they have are wildly different in length, you're going to get data that makes no sense. Here's a kid that gets out of seat, but when he's out of seat, he stays out of his seat for 30 minutes. How long was he out of his seat today? I counted 1. That doesn't really give you the data you want. So what we want to know sometimes is not how many times did it happen, but how long did it last? Or what was the total amount of time? So if you're going to use frequency, 2 things have to be there for you. 1, I can watch that kid the entire time. I never take my eyes off. And 2, the behavior that I'm recording is always about the same length. That way, when I say 3 happened, you know about how much time that took. That's the tally method, the frequency method. Here's an example of what a frequency instrument might look like. On all of these things, the data that you get here, the metric, the data that you get would end up being the data that you would use to compare to an objective on an IEP to say, are we where we want to be? So remember those 4 boxes again. Can we predict when this kid will have problems? Box 2. How will we design instruction and management and individualized programming to make that kid successful? Number 3. How do we organize ourselves as a group of adults to make sure that we actually do what we said we're going to do for that kid? And number 4, how do we know if our plan is working for that kid? Well, an IEP is just a formalization of those things for one kid. And if you have a kid on an IEP, then it's a legal mandate that you monitor. But even if the kid's not on an IEP, if you're going to go through all the trouble of developing a behavior plan and doing something for that kid, it only makes sense that you want to know if it was working. Because if it's not working, you're wasting your time and the kid's time. And if it is working, you want to keep going with it. So we're just thinking right now, what's the simplest way for us to get what we want about that kid? If you've got time to watch a kid and what they're doing is a very discrete, clear ending and beginning, same amount of time, this is probably the easiest thing to do. However, most of us aren't in a classroom with 3 kids. We're in a classroom with 30 kids. So to say I'm going to watch everything you do through the whole class is going to get weird. So I might need other ways of thinking about how to gather these behaviors. Think about this kid, Percy. Here's what we know. On day 1, Percy was out of his seat 4 times. On day 2, he was out of his seat 3 times. And on day 3, he was out of his seat 1 time. What was the worst day for out of seat for Percy? Looks to me like day 1. Frequency-wise, it's day 1. Tell you what though, let's look at how long he was out of his seat. Day 1, total of 1 minute 38 seconds. Day 2, a total of 4 minutes 22 seconds. Day 3, only out 1 time, but it lasted 4 hours, 7 minutes, and 3 seconds. Which day was the worst day for Percy? It depends on what you're looking at. But if you're looking at out of seat being a problem, you're probably worried about how much time he's out of seat. And the frequency doesn't give you a good index because the duration is variable. So if we're using a tally method, the thing you're tallying has to be something that we call discrete behavior. Discrete behavior means it's very clear that it starts and stops and it doesn't last variable amounts. We know exactly what it is. There it is, boom, boom, done. That's what we're looking for. If we don't have that type of behavior, we might need something different. Here's another one you can try. This is my personal favorite. When I was a teacher and when I'm involved with writing objectives on an IEP, I try to find ways to make things into controlled presentation because a controlled presentation lets me decide when I want to collect data. Here's how. A controlled presentation means I can only collect data under certain conditions. Some behaviors must be controlled presentation. Here, I'll give you an example. I'm trying to remember your name. Kelsey. Kelsey, I'm really interested in how often she spits on people when they call her a name. So I start monitoring that. And I find out that she's 0. Is that good? 0 spitting on people. What if nobody called her a name? Then we don't really know if that's good or not. I want to know, does she spit on people when they call her a name? So when do I collect data? When someone calls her a name. That's the idea of controlled presentation is I can only record after this thing has happened. I want to know if this kid handles a consequence well. When do I record? When there's a consequence given. I want to know if this kid handles it well when this kind of a thing. This kid falls down, can we? Okay, those are all things that have to happen first. But here's another way of using that with a trick. I want to know how well student responds when I ask them to do something. So instead of saying, does student follow directions? I'm going to set up a control presentation. What percentage of the directions that the teacher gives are followed? When do I collect data? When I ask a question. I'm in total control of when I collect data. If I don't want to collect data right now, don't ask a question right now. And when I do ask a question, I need to know that's my time to also collect data. But I can set these up to make them easier for me to collect. And so here's a big idea about all of these. I think a lot of times what people do is they write their objective in their IEP. Here's what we want this kid to do. Here's how much of it. Before they've thought out, that's 10 minutes already. Okay, just stop and continue what you're doing and forget about that for now. I think what they should do is first think out, what would be the simplest way for me to measure this behavior? And then they should put that in their objective. Because if my objective says, this kid will do this 99% of all the minutes of the day, guess what I'm monitoring? 99% of 100% actually of all the minutes in the day. You want to think out, how can I write this objective in a way that's measurable, that makes sense, that's logical, and that's practical? So be thinking ahead. The metric with controlled presentation is always percent of opportunities. We just said the opportunity is someone calls her a name. During what percent of those opportunities did she handle it the right way? I used a lot of controlled presentations with my kids. This is what I did. I put a piece of masking tape on my arm. And every time I saw an opportunity, I would make a mark. Every time the kid handled that opportunity appropriately, I'd put a cross across the mark. If they didn't, I'd do nothing else to the mark. At the end of the day, on this masking tape, I have total number of opportunities and total number where they handled it correctly. There's my data. I can convert that to a percentage really easily. That's the simplest way to do opportunities to respond or controlled presentation. I usually don't call this controlled presentation. I usually call it opportunity driven because it connects with the metric of percent of opportunities better. But this allows you to account for the fact that some behaviors won't happen today simply because there was not a chance for them to. So if I say, again, she handled it 3 times right today, is that good? I don't know. How many opportunities were there? If I said 3, we'd say, yes, that's good. If I said 50, I'd say, no, that's not so good. 3 out of 50 is not good. We can only look at it in terms of how many chances were there. So here's one that I see a lot of times. A student will raise their hand. Well, how much do you want them to raise their hand? Do you want them to raise their hand 1,000 times a day? 500 times a day? 12 times? What I think is better is when the student wishes to say something, they will raise their hand before speaking. What's an opportunity? It's them wishing to speak. How will I know that they wish to speak? Because they'll do something. They'll either speak or they'll raise their hand. Speaking out is an opportunity that they didn't do correctly. Raising their hand is an opportunity they did do correctly. So I'm just going to define yelling out, making noises as an opportunity to raise your hand that you didn't use. Now I can say, of the times that that student did communicate today, this is the percentage of those that were done appropriately. Again, you define it that way so you can measure it that way. It does still require, however, that you watch that student, unless you define it as your questioning. So if I say, student will answer a question correctly from the teacher, 80% of opportunities. Okay, there's my kid. I do not need to look at you at all until I ask a question. Then I need to look. Because I've defined when I collect that data. If I'm not the one controlling the opportunity, then I have to be watching for the opportunity and the behavior. So not only do I have to be looking to see whether she's spitting, I've got to be constantly monitoring to see if someone's calling her a name so I know that the opportunity occurred. So if there's a way for you to sneak in that you are the one that controls the opportunity, that makes your life easier as the person who has to collect this data. Here's an example of an opportunity worksheet. This is one I think we actually used in a study at one point. So a tick mark is an opportunity, and a tick mark circled is an opportunity done correctly. What we always try to do on our little sheets when we put them together is we actually put the little calculator for how to convert this into the metric you want at the bottom so that it's easy every day just to know exactly where you were with it. Here's another one. Duration. Duration means how long did it last? What do you think you'd use to get a duration? Timer, stopwatch, watch, phone, whatever you've got that can do that for you. So why would we call this an event-based system? And the other kind of system is a time-based system. Why do we call this an event-based system if we're doing it with a timer? Because the behavior tells us when to start and stop the timer. Hey, kid's doing that, start the timer. Hey, kid, stop doing it, stop the timer. The timer isn't the thing that tells us what to do, the behavior is. So it's real simple. Define what that behavior would be. You want behaviors that have a length to them. Let's do duration of my finger snapping. Are you ready? Get your timer ready. How long did that last? Okay, that would be a dumb thing to use a duration on. That's a tally because it was discrete. It happens. Now if you said, let's do finger snapping and I'm the kind of kid that does this. That's a duration. I want to know how long that's lasting. But if they're doing this, that's a tally. So you have to define how many finger snaps equals finger snapping. 2, 3, 5. You don't want to count those. Let's do a tally on this one. Count how many times I snap my fingers. What'd you get?
24.
You got what?
24.
24? Anybody get different? You got 30. You're way off. That's the problem with high frequency behaviors. I'm trying to count them and it's just like, I would rather just say, how long did that thing last total? It's way simpler. So you start thinking, kid snaps his fingers. I need to know how often that's happening. I think it's more likely you'd want to know how long it's lasting if they're doing that. If they're just snapping, then you might want to get a frequency count of it. Actually, I would say with both of those, with the second one anyway, a time-based one, which we'll talk about in a bit, would make your life way simpler. But for right now, what you'd have to do is pull out that stopwatch, and when the finger snapping barrage begins, you start the stopwatch. When the finger snapping barrage ends, you stop the stopwatch. Now, what are you going to do? It depends on what you want. Do you want to know the average amount of time that these things lasted? Or do you want to know the total amount of time? If you want to know the total amount of time, you don't do anything. You just stop the watch. And when they start, you start it again, and it starts right up from where it stopped, and then it stops. And when they start, you start it again. And at the end of the period, you just say, how much total what did it take? But if you want to know the average, every time you start that watch and then stop that watch, you're going to have to write down the amount of time and then reset the watch so that you can get all of the times and get an average. Way more work for you. Average duration is a difficult thing to get unless you've got nothing to do but sit there and look at the kid. Or if you've got an assistant in the room whose job it is to watch that kid and hold a stopwatch. That doesn't happen very often. So average duration is something I think you might want to try to avoid. Cumulative duration, where you just start and stop, you can walk around the room teaching and doing whatever you're doing and start and stop a stopwatch without a lot of problem. Because you don't have to stop, write something down. You're just clicking and clicking and clicking. That gives you the total at the end. But like our other event-based, remember, if you've got a watch to know when to turn that clock on and off, you're going to be watching that kid the whole time. And if you got 30 kids in the room, that could get weird and difficult again. So we've got some others. Here's a collection form looking at total duration each day. And what they've done is they've taken that total duration and turned it into a percentage of the total time. So what's the problem behavior here? Appropriate play, it's not a problem, it's a good behavior. Appropriate play happened 38% of the day on this day, 34% on this day, 41%, etc. So we can say, is this student doing more appropriate play? And just more isn't enough. It's, what was our goal? Where did we want them to be by some point in time? Are we getting there? Is this intervention working? Are we getting where we want to be with this kid? Here's one that is average duration. In average duration, these aren't different days. They're all in the same day, and then you've got to get an average. One of the hardest things is figuring out how to use the time to get an average, because it's not a base 10 on all of it. So Excel will do that for you. Otherwise, you have to think harder than you normally would to add something up. So again, I would generally say I would avoid that one if you can, because it's more work than you probably need. I think there's an easier way. The next one, and people like this one, latency recording. How long did it take for that kid to follow a direction? I said, let's line up. She did, but it was 5 minutes after I asked. I would like her to follow the direction more quickly. So I'm not tallying or charting or recording whether she did or not. I'm recording how long it took for her to do it. That's known as a latency. How long does it take somebody to do something? You're going to use a stopwatch again. On this one, you're going to define an opportunity. Given that I say, please do this, student will do that within this amount of time. Okay? Let's see if that works. So, I go out and I say, okay, here's your direction. Do that. I got my eyeball on one kid and I start my watch. And I'm watching that kid and I'm watching. And I'm watching. And when I finally see that kid do the right thing, I stop my watch and I record that time. Now what I want to know is, if I then go over and say, hey, you did it within this much time, that was very good. You were here, now you're here, I bet you can get it even lower tomorrow. And we look tomorrow to see, is it lower? Is my intervention working? If it is, we should see that rate or that amount of time, that amount of latency decreasing as we go through time. So we're always looking to see, are we getting better? Is our intervention making this work? So this is pretty simple. SD means signal. Signal, there were 4 different times today I signaled for that. These are the amounts of time that it took for the student to do that. I can either plot those as these are the times, or I could create an average per day. The average today was 2 minutes and 27 seconds. Will the average be lower tomorrow? If my intervention is working, we would expect that it will continue to go down. If my intervention is not working, it won't change, or it won't change significantly. All right, I'm going to stop here. Here's what I'd like you to do. Get back with your partner or partners and compare your totals. Divide your small total by your big total, which will give you a percentage. Try that. If you got the same, of course, you're going to get 100. Okay, raise your hand if you and your partner got more than 90% reliability. Wow. Nobody got more than 90%? You guys got 100%. Very good. I said we did it the right way, yeah. Very good. How many of you got between 70 and 90? Okay. How many of you got between 50 and 70? Anybody get below 50? Sorry to pick on you, but why do you think that happened?
What we were tracking was subjective.
Okay, so it was really hard to define. Whenever what you're looking at is something that you both can't absolutely agree on and define, it's this, we don't know what we're looking at. And then what happens is you get these wildly different. Today it was really high, tomorrow it was really low, the next day it was really high. The issue is the kid's not really changing. We're not sure what we're measuring. So that makes it really important that we get that definition down, that we all agree, what is it that is the behavior we're looking at? What other issues were there? What other things do you guys think happened that made your rates be less than 80 to 90?
Our perspectives were different. We said whenever you go cross to this side of the room.
But you have different eye lines, so that creates different perspectives, okay? That's kind of another part of a definition issue, but exactly, that's important.
Easy to get distracted by something.
It's easy to get distracted. I'm supposed to be watching you, but I'm also trying to watch all this other stuff, and I keep forgetting to watch that thing.
Infrequency of the behavior.
It happens so infrequently that you get kind of bored and stop looking at it. Or all it takes is if one person gets 1 and one gets 2, you're only 1 off, but when you have low frequency, that's a 50%. So you want to be able to find things that have a higher level of happening if you want to be able to get data that's going to be reliable. We generally would only want to track behaviors that are really infrequent if they're really big, like fights. Okay, it might only happen once every few weeks, but it's a big enough thing that we're going to track it. I wouldn't want to track calling out if it only happened every few weeks. That doesn't seem like something I'd want to spend time and effort on. So here's what I want you to do this time. You don't have to, I'd like you to keep the same definition unless your definition didn't work, and then you can find a different one. I want you to draw 10 different boxes on your paper. Okay, and again, unless your definition really was bad and you need to refine it, keep the same definition. But this time, here's what I want you to do. I'm going to set my phone to have a sound once a minute for 10 minutes. Here's what you do. If I have the behavior you're looking for at any time, once or 1,000 times during that interval, when the buzzer rings, you put a plus in there. If I didn't, you put a 0. Do not put the plus in there when I do the behavior, only at the end. So at the very start of the interval, if I do that thing you're looking for, you don't need to watch me for the rest of the interval. Wait till you hear that buzz and put the plus. Why don't you put the plus right now? Because then when the buzzer goes, you might not remember if you've already done that interval or not, and you get confused. So just tell yourself, that's a yes, I'm done looking. If it never happens, you're still watching me, but you'll put a 0 when the buzzer rings. So I'm going to start this timer, and it's going to run for 10 minutes in 1-minute intervals. And we're going to be recording, did the behavior that I'm concerned with happen at all in that interval? Even once or 1,000 is still a plus. All right? I think I have to manually do this every minute. Let's see. All right, here we go. The other kind of instruments we have for monitoring behavior are time-based instruments. That's what you're using right now. The definition of a time-based instrument is behavior doesn't tell you what to do. Timer does. You're going to see a behavior and you're not going to do anything until the timer tells you to do something. When the timer tells you, you'll record what you saw of the behavior, but you won't record except for when the timer tells you to. Time-based recording requires you to have a timer, but in many instances, time-based recording does not require you to watch the person all the time. There are variations of it. What you are doing right now is called a partial interval system. Partial interval system is what you're doing because in a partial interval system, you only record if the behavior occurred at all, anytime, even once. So, what you do is you create an interval length. How long should that interval be? Well, if that behavior happens once or twice a class, then I might set that interval up to be half a class period. If that behavior happens quite frequently, I'm going to make a lot shorter interval, otherwise I'm not going to get something accurate. When we use these in research, we often use 6-second intervals. That's not something a teacher would do because it's a full-time job. So I've gone into classrooms and I have a little Walkman in the old days with a looped tape. And I have taken that looped tape with my watch I know, That's why I'm saying go. Sorry, just a second here. I know, why won't you shut up? Okay. A loop tape, and I take that loop tape and put it on record and take my watch, and every 6 seconds I make a ding, ding, and I do that through this whole 1 minute tape. Put on headphones, I go sit in the back of the classroom and I'm watching a kid. And every 6 seconds I hear a beep, and if they ever did any of the things we're looking for in that 6 seconds, I put a plus. Now being 6 seconds means I am watching nothing but that kid constantly the entire period. You would not do that as a teacher. As a teacher, 1 minute intervals would probably be the lowest, smallest amount of interval you'd want to have. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to figure out how small of an interval could I make and still be able to stay alive and do this all day. Then you're going to define that behavior. When you say it's time, you're going to start that timer and you're just going to go about your teaching. And if you see the kid do that behavior, you put in your head, I don't have to watch them again until the timer rings. So I go about my teaching. And when the timer rings, I think, oh yeah, I got a plus for that. And now I have to look again until I see it happening. What I get when I do this is this. What's the percentage of intervals in which that behavior happened? This is very different from how much of the time did this behavior happen. I don't know how much of the time it happened. I know what percentage of intervals it happened. This is a lot easier to do, but think about it. If you wrote an IEP objective that said number of times a kid does this, you can't measure it with this because this doesn't give you that answer. So think ahead. If you want to write an objective that's measured like this, then your objective has to say percentage of intervals. Otherwise, again, it can't be measured with a percentage of intervals type system. I can't wait till this is over. So, the advantage. A partial interval system is really good with behaviors that don't happen very often because it's going to overestimate. If it even happens once, we're going to say yes. So if you're dealing with a behavior that happens a lot, what's going to happen if you use a partial interval system? You get 100% every time. And it's really not telling you anything. So if it's a behavior that happens a lot, you don't use partial interval. Partial intervals is for behaviors that don't happen very often. If it only happens once or twice, you're still going to get data. That's good. The disadvantage is, like I said, it will overestimate. All of our time-based systems are estimates. Here's what we can estimate was happening with that kid. But as long as we're doing it the same way all the time, how many intervals have we done so far? 5. Is that all? Jeez. As long as we're doing it the same way every time, we can still track progress over time. Here's an example of a partial interval data recording sheet. So this one, it appears, is in 15-second intervals. Again, I think that's, unless you're working with a kid one-on-one, or if you're working with a very small group, I don't think you can teach and do 15-second intervals. But these could be 1-minute intervals, or 2-minute intervals, or 5-minute intervals, or even bigger. So I would say you as a teacher don't want to set these up, certainly not less than 1-minute intervals. And I think 2 to 5-minute intervals is probably more reasonable, but I've had teachers doing these in 15-minute intervals for the whole day. And if it's a low rate behavior, you still get pretty good data on that without having to watch 100% of the time. Here's another one. This one is for behaviors that do happen a lot. momentary interval is the easiest one to use of all of the systems we're talking about, but it's only good for high rate behaviors. If you're doing this with a behavior that rarely happens, you're going to get 0% every day because it's just not sensitive enough. Here's what you do with momentary. You set your timer and you go about your life. When the timer rings, you look at the kid and see if they're doing that behavior. So let's say my target behavior was pencil in hand for some reason. And I'm walking along and I'm doing my talk, and let's say there's my student. And I'm doing my talk, buzzer, no pencil, 0. Go back about your business. Next time, buzzer, pencil, plus. That's all you do. You only look at the end of the interval. Now, here's what bothers people about this one. It's going to underestimate. So let's say that my issue with this kid is disturbing the class. And the interval starts. And the first thing she does is spit on me. And while I'm wiping that off, she sets my clothes on fire. And while I'm putting out the fire, she goes and gets on the telephone and calls 911. And while I'm running over there, she pulls out a gun and shoots a couple people. And then she goes and sits down, and the buzzer goes off, and I go, plus. No, actually it would be a 0. 0. Didn't see the behavior. That's the way it would work. And what sometimes people have a problem with is, yeah, but that one was so bad, I'm going to call it a plus in this interval anyway. But that's not the way you're collecting your data. Momentary would be used if that kind of behavior was happening all day long. Then we could be looking at it that way. Sorry, I'm messing with this. So, again, momentary only works when you're looking for a behavior that really happens a lot. So I've used momentary a lot with out-of-seat behavior. God, this kid's just out of his seat constantly. So I just set up a 5 to 10 minute little thing, and every time I use a vibrate thing on my watch. You can buy these little things that vibrate too. But when my watch vibrates, I just look over. Kid in seat or out of seat? I make my mark, reset my watch. That can be that easy. And the reason I'm using momentary with that out-of-seat behavior is because it's happening so much. If I used partial, it would be every single time I'd have to say yes, and it would look 100% every time, which doesn't do me any good. So why wouldn't I just go back to using a duration? Because it's so much easier just to set the timer and look once in a while than it is to keep that thing in my hand all day. Is that 10 yet? God. So here is the last one, whole interval. A whole interval system is a system in which the student must keep engaged in that behavior for the entire interval in order for us to say it happened. So this kid's engaged, and usually I would use whole interval looking for positive behaviors. I want to know what percentage of intervals this kid can maintain positive behavior through the whole interval. So I might look at in-seat behavior with this one. In-seat, 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 jumps out of his seat with 1 second left. Damn, 0. You got to get the whole thing in order to get it. So this one is also going to underestimate behavior. Momentary and whole will underestimate. We're done. And I'll talk about that in a second. This is good for things that happen a lot, but again, I like to use whole interval more to monitor positive behaviors. It seems to me like it lends itself better to doing that. So we've talked about multiple ways of watching and doing it, event-based, and now you just had a chance to do multiple ways, or look at multiple ways of time-based. Get together with your partner, and again, compare your output. look at your totals. Look square by square, but get a division for your total. Okay, how many of you got better reliability this time than you did last time? That's typical that people do get better reliability with time-based systems, and that's why researchers use them, because to be published, you have to have better than 80% reliability. And when you're doing a tally, that's really hard to get. But when you're using time-based, it's much easier. The other thing is, how did you find data collection to be, in terms of your effort and focus, using time-based versus event-based? Was it easier or harder to do it with the timer? Why? Right, so you didn't have to count anymore. You could just say it happened. Done looking. That's really the big advantage of using, for teachers, for using the time-based system is it makes your life easier. I've tried to set these things up as a teacher, or I'll even use the buzzer in the clock. When I worked in a junior high for a while, consulting, working with some teachers there, and we would set up some systems, and their clock had a buzz every 50 minutes. I was like, let's set up 50-minute interval systems for kids. You don't need to do any kind of creation of anything, just put a piece of masking tape on your arm, and every time that clock goes buzz, ask yourself, have I seen that behavior in the last 50 minutes? Yes or no? That's a simple way to use a time-based system. Find things that are already in the environment going on instead of setting a ridiculous phone like I did will drive you nuts. Again, what I have is a set of little things that I can put either on my belt or on a watch, and you can tell it to vibrate on a pattern. And so I put that on my belt. It's called a motivator. Put that on my belt and set it to 5 minutes. And I'm walking around teaching. When that goes bzzz, I have to think. If that was a partial interval system, I have to think, did that kid have that behavior in the last 5 minutes? If it's a momentary system, I look at that kid right now and go, is that kid doing it right now? And I mark it on my arm. The other kids, and I've done this at every level of school, the other kids go, what are you writing on your arm? And I just go, I'm keeping track of something. And they'll never ask again. They'll be curious, and you just say, I'm keeping track of something. And I'll say, I'm tracking my own, how much I do something. And it's gone. They'll never think about it again. And your data is that tape. So I would just create a paper on my desk with the dates, and on that date, I'd put that masking tape. There's my data. I have data, and all I did was put tape here, do this, and put tape there. But it allows me, when it comes time to monitor an IEP or a goal or a behavior plan or anything else, I have great data. It's daily data. I can show you a pattern. Is this getting better? Could we say we're on a trajectory to get better or not get better with what we want? I can plot that out really accurately because I've got this great data. It really is important. What I found also is, not that you are arguing with people, but if you were, when you show them hard data, they don't have an argument. I'm telling you, this is working. No, it's not. Let me show you the data. Here's 1 month of data plotted every day. It's going up. That's why we're going to keep doing this. And people don't have an argument for, I've been monitoring and I've got data. So you become the most powerful person at the meeting. Nobody can argue with you because you are the data king or queen. That's what you want to have, is that level of confidence that what I'm doing does or doesn't make a difference for this kid. So now let's go back to, what if the data that we have says that it's still not working for this kid? What other kinds of things do we have? And I call these tricks. These are not really educational strategies, they're tricks. And I don't mind saying, sometimes my idea is, how could I trick this kid into being successful? How could I fool them? How could I tie a rope across the hall where they run and trip on the rope and land right on some success? That's what I'm trying to do. How do I create that trick? So, I'm going to use my tricks, because they're bigger, they're more complex, they're going to take more time. I'm going to use my tricks when I have kids for whom the data says the basic stuff we've got with good instruction and management, it's still not enough for this kid. What other tricks do we've got? Well, that's what I'd like to go through. Before we go through that, I'd like to go back to where we left off right after lunch, which was with effective instruction. What kinds of issues or concerns do you think would come up in your school if we were having a discussion about effective instruction? Anybody have anything in particular?
We talked about how a lot of the excuses we get is that they're too low. They're just so low.
The kids are too low?
Yeah.
Kids are too low for effective instruction.
Like,
Um,
like that they won't get, and they have to teach these standards, so.
that standards thing is getting on my nerves. People have so misinterpreted this standards thing. I was in a classroom, it must have been 7th or 8th grade, and these kids were barely able to multiply. And they were trying to do these quadratic equations. And so afterward, I said to the teacher, I don't think they can do these. And she said, that's the standard, that's what I have to teach. Well, I think you're misinterpreting this. Yes, your standard is quadratic equations. How do you get kids to do quadratic equations? Can they do this? No. Can they do this? No. Can they do this? Here's where we start. They can do this, we start teaching there. It just makes no sense to say, I have to teach quadratic equations, so I can't teach multiplication or addition or anything else, because quadratic equations are filled with multiplication and addition. People have misused that whole standards thing to say I don't have to teach sub-skills, and that's totally ridiculous. So you can tell them that I said that's totally ridiculous. I think the comment back is, if you want them to hit the standard, we're going to have to make sure they have all the requisite skills. And if they don't have a requisite skill, we're going to have to go back and teach it. And the better job we do of teaching that requisite skill using effective instruction, the more likely it is that they'll make it all the way up to where we need to be for the standard. It's so easy to say this and so hard to make people listen, but you're a captive audience, you have to listen right now. But when you're out in schools, people can just blow you off. And they do me too. Those are great questions. I wish that I could have answered any of them. But what they are is they're questions about the realities of the world. That just because something's logical, the systems a lot of times are built in ways that aren't. And the best we can do is to be advocates for those kids and say, here's what I've done. Here's the data. Here's the documentation. I'm advocating for them to get this because they're going to need it. And if that doesn't happen, again, your advocacy is all you really have at that point. All right, let's dive into tricks. When we think about tricks, we're going to think about, again, places where it's not been working so far. So I got 3 big ones that I want to start with. The first one is the group contingency. A group contingency is when we say, hey, if everybody here gets all of this, we all get all of something. That's different from this one. If she does it right, we all get. We don't want that one. We want teamwork. We're all in this together. If everybody in here can work together to get this goal met, we'll all be reinforced with this thing. That's a group contingency. So what we're trying to do with a group contingency is get kids to do things that they can do. Group contingencies do not work at the acquisition level. Group contingencies are made to get kids to do things they already have done and can do, but just sometimes don't. It's more of a compliance thing. So here's what we do. Let's say you're sitting up front was a bad idea today. Let's say that she is like Jimmy up here and she is making the goofy noises. And you guys always laugh at her for making goofy noises. And I've determined that that's the function of her behavior, is to get attention from you all for goofy noises. So here's what I'm going to set up. For the next hour this morning, if I don't hear any goofy noises, and I don't hear anybody laughing at goofy noises, everybody in here earns, and I make something up, 15 minutes of extra recess. Or if it's at the high school, 15 minutes of free time. Something. It's big this first time we do it. Now, what I want is for all the kids, if she starts to make noises, I want the other kids, instead of laughing, to go, no. I want them to shut it down. They've been pushing it up. I want them to push it down. Then I want everybody to help each other. So when I do a group contingency, I'll always say, so remind your neighbor. It's a team effort. Remind your neighbor. Get groups together, remind other groups that if we get this done, you all win. Now that will be very effective if this kid is motivated to do it. However, you know her. She loves attention. Unfortunately, she likes negative attention as much as positive attention. So if you're yelling that you love her or yelling that you hate her, it's just as good as long as you're yelling in her direction. So here's what happens when we use the group contingency. If everybody gets this done and there are no noises in here, no laughter at anything inappropriate, everybody in here gets this. And she's thinking, here's my opportunity. And she stands up and goes, I'm not doing it because I don't want any of you to get anything extra. Screw you guys. She just blew your group contingency up in your face. So, think ahead. If the kid you're thinking about in your classroom for the group contingency, it doesn't have to be one kid that you're thinking about, but if there is a kid in your classroom that you think would stand up and sabotage it for everybody just to get that negative attention, don't use a group contingency. What if you do put a group contingency in place and then you didn't expect it, but this kid does it? Here's how you handle that. So I give out the contingency. And everybody says, okay. And she says, I'm not doing it. I don't care about you guys. And I come over and go, no, this didn't include you. She goes, why didn't it include me? I knew you didn't want to be included. It was for the whole class, but not you because I knew you didn't want to. And she'll go, yes, I do. Well, you just said you didn't. And I've had kids go, come on, how come I can't be a part of this? And I go, well, do you want to be? You'd have to be able to get through here without making noise, and you'd have to do this, but it's up to you. I just assumed you didn't. But it totally takes the wind out of their sails when you go over and just say, oh, I'm sorry, this wasn't for you. I meant the rest of the people. Either they'll say, well, that sucks, or they'll say, I want to be a part of it. Either way, you get out of that. But you got out of it in a way that could be ugly. So you don't want to set up a group contingency hoping to do that. I don't ever set up a strategy thinking that it'll get negative before it gets positive. I don't want to do that. She's had enough negative attention and enough issues. I don't want to create a strategy that's based on she'll have to fail again before we can get better. So do not use group contingencies if you believe you've got kids that like that kind of attention. The next one I've got is the good behavior game, which can be done in a multitude of ways, but it's very simple. The good behavior game is just simply a variation of the group contingency. And I see people do this all the time and they don't call it the good behavior game, which is great. Here's what you do. Here's one way to do it. I've got this side of the class competing against this side of the class. Every time someone gets the right answer, they get a point. Every time someone yells out or says something inappropriate, the other team gets a point. What we're going to do is see which team can get the most points. You don't want to have a giant reinforcer for this because half the class is going to lose. So you have a small one. And the one that gets it all will get first pick tomorrow of, so you make it really simple. What I've found, especially with little kids, is that I can make them do the competition just for the amount of points. Oh my God, I've never had anybody get to 20 points. Anybody here think they could get to 20? Let's see. And they'll fight it out for, we want 20. And then when they get to 20, we'll go, yay, you got 20. And that's enough. High school kids do not fall for that at all. So be thinking, how could I set that up? Here's a variation. Me against all of you. Every time I say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, you get a point. Every time you do the right thing, you get a point. Anytime you guys break one of these rules, I get a point. And we just see who wins. That is incredibly basic, incredibly simple. However, there happen to have been multiple IES, which is our big Institute of Education Sciences. There have been multiple IES major grant awards for a group of people at Johns Hopkins, Nick Leongo and Shep Kellum and some people, to study the good behavior game. And they have published a ton of stuff out there saying it's highly effective. Here's the one caveat with their research. It's all been done on elementary. So, while there are people using this at middle and high school, less so, but there are people using it, the data that we have that says it's really effective is really data on elementary kids. So I would say this is a research-based practice with a big effect if you're talking about elementary. Whether it is a big effect on middle or high, we don't have the data to say that. So I don't know. Again, I've seen it used and I've seen it work, but I couldn't say that I think it's an evidence-based high-effect practice at those grade levels. Behavior momentum. This is one of my favorites, and one thing I've been trying to study this. I've got a couple things going on right now. We're trying to build a study. I'll try to explain some of that to you. This is the whole idea. It's a trick. It's really what it says, momentum. Can you get the kid doing good things at such a rate that they just jump right to the next thing without thinking about it? It's a trick. You trick kids into doing this. So, I'm picking on the same people up front. I'm trying not to pick on you. She does not do her work. She has an outstanding math assignment that's a month old. Every day when she comes in, I say, hey, Bianca, how about that math assignment? And you know what she says?
No.
Exactly. She says, I don't think so. I don't want to. So, how likely is it that tomorrow when I come in and say math assignment, she says yes? We call that a low probability request. It's a very low probability that she'll follow through. Here's what behavioral momentum would say. Behavioral momentum says, when she comes in the morning, give her 2 or 3 things to do that you know she will do and reinforce her big time for doing it. What I like to do when I do this is figure out the right word to use. So I would say with this one, it's responsible. Getting your math work done is responsible. So I want to find a way to say responsible to her. Here's what I'm going to do in the morning. Bianca, glad you're here. I need responsible people. I like you because you're responsible. One of the few people around here that I can really count on. Would you please get those books on that shelf and move them over here because I count on you to be responsible. Would you do that for me?
Sure.
Thank you. I go about my business, doing my things in the class. When she's done, I come over. Bianca, thank you so much. That was so responsible. I love having responsible kids like you around. Really, really like having responsibility. Thank you. I come back. By the way, because you're so responsible, would you mind erasing that board for me? Some of these clowns around here I just can't trust, but you I can trust because you're responsible. Would you do that for me?
Yeah.
Thank you. And I go about my business, and I come back again. Oh man, Bianca, thank you so much for being responsible. Your responsibility should be an inspiration to the rest of these guys. Do I need a third one? I don't know. I might just try setting the hook right now. You know what else would be responsible? get some of that math stuff done. Oh, I've done this with kids and they've literally looked me in and go, nice try. It was worth it. I got some books moved, I got my board erased. It doesn't take that long. It's a trick. It may or may not work. With older kids, you have to be way more sophisticated. Well, little kids, it's really easy to trick them. They come in, hey, touch your nose. Wow, you really follow directions, amazing. Wow. And then you say, why don't you? But it does have a track record. The thing we don't know is you can't predict who it's going to work with. So when it's not predictable when it's going to be effective, you just trial and error it. The good thing about behavioral momentum is there's not a downside to it. There's nothing ugly going to happen. The worst that's going to happen is she's going to say, yeah, I don't want to do that. Okay, well, I gave it a try. That was a test. So the hard part for us in studying this is, what are we going to measure? So we've started thinking what we would need to measure is on-task behavior. So if we find a kid who's really off task all morning, we're going to try doing this. Bring them in and give them 3 things to do that set them up where they can't possibly be off task, and praise them. You are so focused. Man, when you get on task, you are drilling it. Man, it is amazing. It's impossible. And we do that 3 times, and then we say, let's do independent work. Would that make them more likely to be on task? Hard part is we can't find the right kids to do this in a classroom that we can get permission to watch and do all these other things. So here's a secondary question. Something we call non-contingent praise. Same idea. Look for kids that are off task, but when they first walk in the door in the morning, have the teacher follow them around telling them how awesome they are. And it doesn't need to be empty praise. It can be praise for anything. Bianca, you remembered to wear your glasses today. Fantastic. She's like, I've never forgotten in the past, but I'm just making this kind of stuff up. Bianca, first one to sit down. Impressive, Bianca, great job. I noticed that Bianca got this, and I'm just making these praise statements about Bianca. Would having that level of positives from a teacher unrelated to anything else make that student have better behavior? There is some evidence for that out there in the literature called non-contingent praise, but I don't know if it would work in the context I just talked about. That's a study that I think we need to run. So we're going to try to do that. But they all fall under this same kind of heading, behavior momentum. There is a really long research on choice from a variety of contexts. One of my favorite articles of all time, for some reason over the last couple of years I've lost the names of the researchers in my head, but here's what they did. I think they were like 5th or 6th grade kids, and they were in a room for kids with behavior problems. And those 3 kids were given a worksheet to do every day, and they didn't do the worksheet. So here's what the researchers did in cooperation with the teacher. They came in and they said to the kids, you know, we really shouldn't be just giving you a worksheet every day to do. You're old enough to make a choice about what your work should be. So from now on, we're going to give you 3 possibilities, and you choose the one that best fits you. All they did was jumble the problems up into 3 different orders and put them on 3 colors of paper. The illusion of choice is a choice. So the kids now start going up, and they get to pick their own paper, and the rates of production go way up. That's what we're looking for. Can you allude to giving kids options and choices? This isn't necessarily something you only do for kids with problems. Offering choices is a great strategy for just the way you run a classroom, as long as you control the choices. But when you've got a kid who's really not doing something, and it could be exactly like Bianca again, not doing that work, I ask her, she doesn't do it, so it's not working. Every day I say, please, and she says no. I need a different strategy. So if not behavior momentum, let's try a choice. Here's what you do with a choice. You give them an equal opportunity for something else. It can't be anything other than equal. It's not an ultimatum. Hey, here's the deal. Choice is yours. Do your work, get suspended. That's not choice. That's an ultimatum. This also wouldn't work as a choice. Your choice is to get that work done or watch TV. They have to be equal. So I'm going to come over and I say it just like this to a kid. You know, Bianca, you're old enough to make your own decisions, and so I appreciate the fact that you're responsible and can make the decisions, so I'm going to let you make the choices, not me. You can either get that math work done, which would be great for you to get that out of the way, or you can get the journaling assignment done from the last couple of days that isn't finished yet. I'm going to leave it totally up to you. You all know Bianca, what's she going to say? I don't really want to do either one of those things. I'd like to watch TV. Don't address that, because that's not one of the options. It was this or this, and it's totally up to you. Well, what about this? No, but it was two options, and they're both totally up to you. This one or this one. Which one would you like to do? I'm not going to decide for you. You're old enough to make, and you just keep hitting that choice like a broken record over and over and over. And at some point, if she never does either one, you have to realize this is not going to work with her. And you say to yourself, choice as my trick of choice for Bianca does not work. Don't do that one with her. Back to the drawing board. And we go back, all right, what else we got? But choice is where we would like to start as one of our possibilities because it's so simple. Again, it's those, what could I do that's really not wildly different from what I'm already doing to get that kid motivated to take that first step so I can start giving more positives. So here's exactly the way I present that, as I just showed you. And when Bianca chooses one, I am all over it. So I've done this with a kid and they'll go, well, if those are my only two choices, I guess I'd rather do the journaling. That is such a responsible choice. You're going to need paper and a pencil. Let me get you one. And I'm just all over this. Paper, pencil, because you made a great choice. Boy, you're so mature. I'm just like jumping on that. What a great, responsible decision that was. And I'll hover around that desk and give them whatever they need to get going because I want to really reinforce the fact that they said, I just chose to do some work. So I want that to be super, super positive. I got to avoid my sarcasm there and just go back to these are the pieces that have to be there to make this work. The younger a kid is, and this is true for older kids a lot of times, but the younger a kid is, the harder it will be for them to see things in the future. The consequences need to be as immediate as possible. So when you're saying something bad's going to happen in the future, that doesn't compute for me. I don't see more than like 5 minutes ahead. So one, we need to break those things down into much smaller increments. So I would think, can we say we're giving you points on earning things on an hourly basis or a daily basis, and you have to earn these points to get to something at the end, instead of there's one thing, there's one feedback loop, and that's at the very end. That feedback loop has to be far more frequent for little kids. 2, charting. Chart where he is and where he wants to be so he can see where he is for that future thing. And we've got that great data that says the more they can see where I am now compared to where I need to be and where I've been, helps them to think, what do I have to do right now to stay there? It's not the be all end all, but it's another helpful piece. 3, I think those kids need, all kids need, explicit instruction as to what the consequence is and how it's applied. And when we did a bonus session last night on escalating kids, I talked about this. Same issue here. You need to teach kids what the consequences are explicitly, and then practice it. Show them. Here might be an example. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say, I'm going to make up something for you. Shira, as long as you're holding a pen when I come back here, you are all on and you're going to be going to the Friday thing. If you don't have the pen, you're not going to be able to go because you'll have to stay back here and work. You need to go to that Friday thing. You need to be there, so I want to make sure that you bring a pen. I'm going to remind you, all right? Because I'm on your side. Shara, remember to bring that pen. I know you can. Now tomorrow, put your pen down. Tomorrow you don't have a pen. Here's the way I approach that. Oh, Shira, man, we talked about this and then you forgot. You chose not to bring the pen. Now you're not going to get that Friday deal. how can I help you remember that? I'm so disappointed that you're not going to get the Friday deal. I am totally on your side. Totally with you. I'm teacher. I want you to be successful. But I told you ahead of time what that was. With little kids, sometimes I'll drag them all the way through it. So what if you got this point? Okay, then what if you got this point? What if you got this? Let's go over here. I'll show you. Here's what we do on Fridays. So now let's walk back. What do we have to do to get this point? What do we have to do to get this point? What do we have to do? And just, literally make it explicit what's going to happen. Now that we've done that, I can be reminding you all along. I'd put that up on the wall even. Here's our Friday thing. Here's the thing I have to get done today. Here's the thing. Just keep pointing to it. Wow, you're doing great this morning. See that Friday thing? You're already there. The next dot is, that's all you got to do is get that done. I know you can do that. I'm just providing you with a whole bunch of extra reminders that are based on the instruction I gave you of the little plan that we have. You have to make it super explicit for those kids that can't see it. And you have to be able to, once you give them the reinforcer that they just earned, reinforce them and point to what's next. If they got it wrong and there was a consequence, you can say, here's where that didn't happen, but you still can get it on the next one if. So I would never want to see a plan where one mistake blows it for you, because then what do I got to work for the rest of the time? You should always be able to stay on a path going above and below, not staying only above. And then you just try to fade parts of that out as you go through the year. Now, that's what I would do. I don't know the kid you're talking about. That's the kind of thing I would do. If that didn't work, then we got to try something else. And it's got to be even bigger and more in your face and probably broken down into smaller times, et cetera, et cetera. But that's the kind of things I think we have to start with. But again, that charting, here's where you are, here's where you're going to go. Put it right up on the wall. Visual. And not being able to take something away is something you can get around pretty easily. So here's what you want to do. Instead of taking something away, have something be available. So really what you're losing is an opportunity to get something. So we're all going to do this at the end of class. If you do this, you won't be eligible for that participation. I'm not reaching out and taking something away. I'm just saying you won't be eligible for this thing. The other is, if you have to separate kids, find a way to do it in a way that is, hey, let's do a different setup here. How about if you're over here, and find ways to make that so that you're not calling attention to the negative as much, which makes somebody pout and say, I'm not going to do it. But really what you want to do is have something that everybody really likes to do at the end of class. And to be eligible, you have to have been doing the right things all the time. You can create something that they want at the end. So don't try to rely on something that the other teacher would have to take away, because it's too far removed from your classroom too. But I don't like the idea ever of saying, and actually some of the research on the good behavior game does this and I don't like it. We're going to give you these points, and when you do something wrong, we'll lose points, and we'll see how many are left at the end. What you're saying is my whole strategy is based on doing things when you do it wrong. I want the strategy to be based on me communicating you more for doing it right. So figure out how you can use kids doing it right to earn this thing they want to do at the end for the last 2 minutes rather than taking away. But you have to earn that. So somebody who's not doing it would have to watch everybody else do it. Again, that's a guess. It may or may not work, but those are the kind of things to consider. Whenever you're going to individualize any kind of reinforcement for one kid, whether it's verbal or tangible or whatever, you have to be aware that the other kids will notice that, and there could be a pushback. One, you can get rid of some of that by making your classroom as positive as possible. But if I'm going to do something really individualized for him, let's say, if you can just get homework done once, we'll have a party for you, just once. You guys are all going, well, that sucks. Nobody's giving me anything for my homework. If I know I've got to do that for him, then this is what I'm going to do for the rest of you. I'm going to start a couple days ahead of time. You know, I'm so glad that you guys are in my class. You get your homework done every day. You're so responsible. It's just awesome to have responsible people in here. You guys, we're going to talk to your parents about doing some extra things for you because you're super responsible. I say that over and over and over for a couple of days. Then, when I say, we need to do something different, Andrew, here's what we're going to do. These guys don't want anything to do with that extra thing Andrew's getting because they're so much better than that. If you hit kids with a ton of verbals about how impressed and how great they are and how it's so awesome to have them in your class, when you say to one kid, you're not doing it right, here's what we're going to do special, the other kids, they don't want any part of that. But if you're just putting everybody else on extinction all the time, when you go to give this kid something, they're all like, hey, what about us? We don't get anything. The verbal acknowledgement that you give those kids and tell them how proud you are is gigantic to them, to most of them. You've got to crank those things up in order to differentiate for one kid. So every time I would ever do an individualized intervention with one kid, I'd figure out what that kid was going to get that the other kids would say was unfair, and we would make sure that we spent a couple of days before that went in place cranking up the reinforcement on how responsible the other kids were so that they were feeling really good about themselves before that happened. Now that's not a 100% sure thing, but that's the way you protect against that particular issue. What I want to show you before we take a little break here is this again, responding to crisis. To think about stopping. I try to give myself, and this is something I've had to teach myself because I don't do this naturally or well, I've tried to give myself a prompt to take 3 counts before doing something. So kid says, you can go to hell. 1, 2, 3 before I respond. 1, it makes me look calm. 2, it helps me to be calm. And make sure that I'm not saying something that's going to make this go up faster. Relax. Take your time. Respond slowly and very methodically. I understand you're upset. That was not appropriate. Just have a seat for right now and we can talk about this in a bit. Don't come back at them hard and fast when they've said something because they're going to go up. And we don't want to cycle them up. Let them come down, then we can have a discussion about consequences. Physically disengage. Don't get up in their face. Don't do the physical thing. Don't come over here like this because it's threatening. If you come over and eye contact is minimal. Look at the ground and you're just saying, all you need to do, here's all I'm asking. It's very simple. Could you please just do this one thing? It'll all work out. And move. Very much like yesterday when I said you go to kids and you say it and you say, I'll be right back. You don't say, I'll be right back here, but you move. So if you could just show me that, thanks, it'll be great. Come around, move away. I like the way you're calm on yourself. Just keep moving. Keep walking away and coming back. Because this is a threat and a challenge. Say it, down, head down, move. Come back, say it, head down, move. Keep thinking in that way. I've talked yesterday at the bonus thing about a room clear. So here's what's happening. This kid is so out of control that the teacher can't reasonably go and put her hands on him without causing it to get bigger and uglier and very physical. She's afraid, though, that the actions of this kid might harm the safety of others. So she chooses to implement a room clear, which just means move the other kids instead of this kid. I can't move her because she's freaking out, so I'll move the others. In order to do this, you have to have taught kids what a room clear is. So this is one of the first things in my classrooms I was taught in the first day. There might be a time when I'd ask you all to go, and here's how we would do that. In this one, they go out into the hall, which means you have to have another teacher ready to take them. But I've also seen people do a room clear where kids all just move to one side or the other, depending upon where the problem is occurring. You don't provide attention to the kid once they leave. It's like timeout. After the kids leave, the teacher just sits down and starts doing work. You don't come over and yell at the kid. You don't come over and say, what's up with you? Let's have a talk. This is de-escalation time. Just let the kids simmer all the way down to calm, then we can have a conversation. This is a time for cooling off, we didn't get everybody out of the room so you guys can have a knockdown, drag out fight. We got everybody out of the room so we can let you calm. The other kids are distractions, and I fear for their safety when you're throwing stuff. If you have a student who you believe is highly likely to engage in these types of behaviors, a couple things to do first. First, teach all your kids how to not get kids going. When you see her starting to have that problem, we don't talk to her. You don't have to make it about her. We can make it about everybody. When you see someone getting mad, we try to get out of their way and let them calm down. But you're really teaching them what that procedure will be. I would give that a word, so call it ignore. And I used that word once to the class that I had. Ignore, and we practice it. Okay, let's say that something's happened right now, and I say ignore, and it's going on right here. What do you do? And then everybody's supposed to turn their back and get to work and just ignore it or move out of the way. And we practiced that. So one, you're ready for that when it comes. Two, I think you need to have a crisis plan in waiting with teacher next door, office, whoever, so that when this happens, you know exactly what to do to get somebody to help you. Three, if you've got a kid that you have good evidence for that there's a good chance this student will escalate to the point of needing physical restraint, then somebody who's trained in physical restraint needs to be a part of that plan and be available. Because you, if you're not trained, do not want to put your hands on a child because it's a health risk and it's a legal risk for you. So you don't want to be there. So again, I think if you say the average, it's a rarity that you'd have a kid like that. But if you know you've got that kid, then I think you have to go to the administration and say, we know this kid is highly likely to have the kind of escalation that may require restraint to keep her safe. Therefore, when we build this plan, I want to know that when I put that crisis plan in place, immediately somebody who's trained in that can be here. And if you don't have anybody trained in that, we need to get somebody trained in that. Because otherwise you really put yourself at risk. But the bottom line is when you see her starting to escalate, ramping up, what you want to do at that point is distract her. So if you figure out what she's agitated about and find a distraction. So you say, you can see her starting to get going. Hey, come here, I want to show you something. It's really cool. Get her to break that chain before she gets going. But if it's going and she can't come back down, then you're quickly moving other people out of the way. And you should just try to keep saying in as calm a voice as possible, thank you for coming down. Thank you for getting yourself calm. It's going to be okay. It may or may not work. But then if it starts cranking all the way up, you put that crisis plan into place where somebody else is there to help. It's hard to do that in a regular school building because we're not really set up to have the squat team come in all the time. So, I'll tell you what, let's do. Let's just take a 5-minute break because we've been talking a long time. I've been talking a long time. You've been listening a long time. Let's take 5 minutes. When you come back, I'm going to hit this last piece on changing adult behavior. All right. I don't have a whole lot more, but I wanted to, as I've been promising you for the last 2 days, talk about this last little piece, changing adult behavior. One of the reasons I like to save this till the end is because of this data here. This data says sending somebody to listen to someone like me talk will change their knowledge by 10%, their skill by 5%, and their actual performance in the classroom by 0. So I wanted you to see that after I'd already talked, not before. Then it says, if I were to show you videos of things that would make it realistic for you, that would increase your knowledge by 30%, your skill by 20%, and we don't have any evidence that it would change your behavior in a classroom. Then we've got the evidence that says, if we were to actually break up and role play and have practice and get feedback in here, it would increase what happens in the classroom by 5%. The only evidence in the entire universe we have for changing the behavior of teachers who are already on the job and working hard with a million things to do is to get them coaching and formative feedback on their performance in the classroom. And when you think about it, That makes sense because that's what we said works for kids. Effective instruction is effective instruction. It needs to be real, it needs to be relevant, and it needs to be something that you get to practice with formative feedback and goal setting, etc. Who sets the goals? The teachers. So here's what we've been trying to do. We have, in a bunch of our schools that we run, PLCs. So if you don't know what PLCs are, they're little teams that meet in the school called professional learning communities. It'd be somewhat like a team of people with a similar role. And what we've said is once a month, that PLC has to meet and talk about whatever it is we want. It might be, we're going to talk about instruction, and we want to talk about OTRs, feedback, time spent engaging with a lesson, all of those things. It might be behavior management stuff, and we might want to talk about teachers moving about the room, engaging positively with kids, etc. We figure out what it is we want to do, and we give them a logic. Why is it important that I think about moving, using OTRs, giving feedback, etc.? What's the logic there? What's the research say? Why should I care? Second, we need to show you, using good examples, the difference between the right way and the wrong way. Going back to our what works for instruction, good examples. We need to make clear to you what good OTRs look like and sound like. What are the ways you could do them? Next, what we found is once you show people a whole bunch of ways to do it, this is what they say. And that wouldn't work in my room. So what we've done is we've said once you see a bunch, we want you to discuss in your team, how would I have to tweak that to make it work with my kids? Because your kids are unique and your class is unique. So we want people to think this through, to be engaged. What do I have to do to make this work given that my kids are unique? Fourth, we want you to think about going in and taking data and watching other people so that you could give them the data. And here's what we set these people up to do. In the next month, I want you guys, we're going to just draw straws, and every one of you is going to go observe another one of you. You can tell the person coming in when you want them to come, and you can tell them what you want them to monitor. You choose. So I might choose, I'd really like to work on OTRs. I have a class that I do that with next Wednesday. Could you come in Wednesday sometime? We get that figured out. I come in and I sit and I take data, tally how many OTRs you provided. I give that back to you. You put that on your own little chart. Here's how many I had. Next month, we're going to do it again. And I'm going to continue to monitor myself based upon your observations of me. Then, when we get back together in our PLC next month, we're going to talk about this. Every month you get a homework task to be observed and think about it, and we come back and we rediscuss and go through the logic again and talk about what other things could we do to make that get better. I tried this and this is what really worked for me. Oh, I'm going to try that next month to see if that works for me. I did this. What we're really doing is we're forcing people to continue thinking about this all year, to continue getting practice with it all year, and to continue getting feedback on it all year. In the schools where we've done this, we have charted out, they do give more OTRs, they do use more positive feedback, they do these things more, but it's a lot of effort to make that happen because it has to happen monthly throughout the year. So here are some examples of things we've been doing to make that work better. First, we went and did focus groups with elementary, middle, and high school teachers, and we asked them, what would make this not work in your classroom? Here's what OTRs are. When could you use them? When couldn't you use them? And so now we know ahead of time what people think. We're going to build little videos of kids having problems and teachers doing things. Every one of those vignettes we build is based on real things teachers told us. To do this in a school, for you to say, how do I get teachers together, or just a group of friends together that want to do this, you don't need to have videos and all the fancy stuff. You just need to have, what is something that we are all interested in trying to do better? And what could we do to discuss strategies for ourselves doing that? And then how could we monitor and give feedback to one another throughout the year? The part that has been missing on this a lot, and still is in a lot of our schools, is that this is divorced from how teachers are evaluated. And we've been really pushing, if you're going to ask your teachers to do this all year, then when you, the administrator, do your walkthrough, you should be looking for the same things. Instead of having totally different things that we're working on, this all should be aligned into things that we think would make the biggest difference for our kids, which is all what it comes back to. So I said I would tell you how we're changing adult behavior. We don't have the data yet. The data that I have from the pilots of the pilot say it's working very well, but that's a very small number of schools. So right now we're implementing this in a large number of schools. And like I said, I'm not showing you this to say you should get video. We're doing it with video because Jefferson County has 100 and some thousand kids and a whole bunch of schools, and we need to find a way to standardize. But we have a whole bunch of other schools that aren't Jefferson County that don't have any video. They have groups that get together and say, what are our kids doing that's causing failure for them? And what are the logical things we could do to make that better? How do we now work with one another to keep ourselves growing in those areas and making it better for our kids? We just want to observe one another, get our data, and chart it to see if we're getting there. Same logic of effective instruction as we have for kids. Modeling, demonstration, engagement, feedback, formative feedback, goal setting, all the same things. Are there any questions about the pieces here on changing adult behavior? I wish I had a way simpler explanation. I wish we could just say, oh, you just do this. And again, I was a teacher, and I know that I set goals for myself to say more positive things and never did. It's life gets in the way, teaching gets in the way. And so it's not because we're bad people or bad teachers. We're busy, and we got a million things on our mind when you're in front of a bunch of kids. But like I said, you don't need videos to do that. You can go and find videos, which gives me an entree to go to my last slide here. I thought I had this on here, but no. CIBRS.com. Center for Instructional Behavior Research in Schools.com is my website. When you go to that website, at the top, there'll be some little menus, and one says videos. Excuse me. When you click on videos, a menu will drop down of a whole bunch of different kinds. We've got a bunch that are on prevention of restraint and seclusion. We got some on dealing with kids with mental health issues. We've got a whole bunch on what do effective instructional practices look like. We've got a bunch on, and we just keep adding to that. There are probably 50 to 70 videos on there right now. They're all free, and you can use them in any way you want other than to sell them. As we get new ones, and I get permission from the people we're building them with to put them up, they're all going to go up there public domain. So whatever we have that we can build, use public domain, will end up there. Some of the things that we've built for people where they own them, they probably won't ever go on our site. But a whole bunch that we built for Kansas is at the state of Kansas is at the website tasn.org. And when you go there, go to search resources and just type in positive behavior support, or in fact, just think of all the things we talked about today. Type in behavior momentum. You'll see a video of it. Type in giving kids choice. Type in opportunities to respond. Type in fact, we shot a bunch of videos of the measurement systems. If you typed in partial interval recording, you'd see a video of how somebody does that. So all of this stuff is out there somewhere. You shouldn't have to pay any money for anything like this if you just look around. And if you really need something very specific that you can't find, You can always email me, and if I know of something, I will certainly send you in the right direction. Are there any other questions about anything that we've covered? Because I feel like I've really done like the tour de force. Like I said, I don't have a single other thing that I know. I've told you everything I know. So that's a lot of stuff to think about. Are there any other questions? If we had to stay one more day, I would only be talking about like football or beer or something, because I don't know anything else. So I do want to thank you, Elisa, and for others for inviting me to be here with you. It's not really a normal thing for me to spend 2 days with a group of people that includes students and teachers and special ed, et cetera. And so it was kind of fun for me to get to just be honest with you and tell you things I think work and don't work. So I hope it's been useful for you. Most of what I've talked about is in my book somewhere. But again, if you have any questions, concerns, want anything, I don't sell anything. So if I own it, you can have it. Here's my email address. All right. Thank you all.